When most people think of Jewish New York, they think of Borough Park, Crown Heights, and the Diamond District on 47th Street. But beneath the New York that everyone knows, there is a second map, an invisible one. Neighborhoods where tens of thousands of Jewish families once lived, built synagogues, bought challah on Friday afternoons, and then left. So slowly, the neighborhood forgot they had ever been there. In 1950, over 40 distinct neighborhoods across the 5 boroughs had Jewish populations exceeding 50%. Today, most New Yorkers could not name 5 of them. Now let us begin. Number 10. East Flatbush sits in the center of Brooklyn. Today, it is home to one of the largest Caribbean American communities in the United States. Haitian Creole and Jamaican patois fill the streets. But 70 years ago, this was a Jewish neighborhood. In the 1940s and 50s, an estimated 60 to 65% of East Flatbush residents were Jewish. The neighborhood had more than 30 synagogues. Congregation Beth El on Linden Boulevard held over 1,000 congregants for high holiday services. Kosher butchers and appetizing shops lined Utica Avenue from Church Avenue to Clarendon Road. The departure began in the early 1960s. Jewish families moved to Canarsie, Mill Basin, and the South Shore of Long Island. By 1980, the Jewish population had fallen below 5%. Today, it sits near 0. Congregation Beth El became a Haitian Baptist church. At least 14 other former synagogues now serve as churches for Caribbean congregations. On some of these buildings, if you look above the new signage, you can still see a Star of David carved into the stone, a symbol no one on the pavement below has any reason to recognize. A neighborhood where 60% of the population was once Jewish and not a single synagogue remains open is a quiet kind of erasure. But the next neighborhood on our list was once called the Jerusalem of America, and what happened to it was not quiet at all. Number 9. Brownsville sits in eastern Brooklyn. In the 1920s and 30s, it was one of the most densely Jewish neighborhoods on earth. By 1925, an estimated 95% of Brownsville's population was Jewish. Over 100,000 people packed into tenements and narrow streets. The Lowe's Pitkin Theater on Pitkin Avenue seated over 2,000. The Hebrew Educational Society on Hopkinson Avenue served as both a school and a social anchor. This was the neighborhood that produced Danny Kaye, Phil Silvers, and Aaron Copland. The decline began in the 1950s. By the 1970s, the neighborhood had been devastated by poverty, crime, and housing abandonment. The Lowe's Pitkin Theater was demolished in 1977. Today, Brownsville has one of the lowest median household incomes in New York City, roughly $30,000 a year. The Jewish population is effectively 0. Walk down Pitkin Avenue today and you will see check cashing shops, dollar stores, and empty lots secured with chain-link fencing. There is no plaque marking where the Lowe's Pitkin Theater stood. No sign that 95% of the people who once lived on these blocks shared a language, a faith, and a way of life that has vanished entirely. A neighborhood that was 95% Jewish and produced some of America's greatest cultural figures is now one of its poorest. But head north to the Bronx and you will find a neighborhood where the Jewish community was not displaced by economics. It was physically cut in half by a highway. Number 8. East Tremont sits in the central Bronx. In the 1940s and 50s, an estimated 50 to 60,000 Jewish residents lived here. Synagogues included the Tremont Jewish Center on Eastern Boulevard and the Young Israel of East Tremont. The streets were lined with kosher delis, Jewish bakeries, and Yiddish language newsstands. Then came Robert Moses. In the late 1940s, the master planner began construction of the Cross Bronx Expressway directly through the residential heart of East Tremont. Over 1,500 families in a single 1-mile stretch were displaced between 1952 and 1960. Residents organized and proposed an alternative route just 2 blocks south that would have avoided the densest housing. Robert Moses refused. The families who were not directly displaced watched their neighborhood collapse around them. Shops closed. Synagogues lost their congregations. By 1975, the Jewish population had dropped from over 50,000 to fewer than 3,000. Stand on the pedestrian overpass at Southern Boulevard today and look down at the Cross Bronx Expressway. 6 lanes of trucks and cars moving through a concrete canyon. This is what was built on top of 50,000 Jewish lives. A highway that destroyed a neighborhood of 50,000 Jewish residents is an act of civic violence most New Yorkers have never heard described in those terms. But travel northeast and you will find a Bronx neighborhood where the Jewish departure was not violent. It was simply so gradual that no one noticed it happening. Number 7. Pelham Parkway runs along a green corridor in the northeast Bronx. It was built as a middle-class residential district in the 1920s and 30s, and Jewish families were among its earliest residents. By the 1950s, an estimated 40 to 50% of Pelham Parkway was Jewish. Families lived in brick apartment buildings set back from tree-lined streets. The Pelham Parkway Jewish Center on Lydig Avenue was the social hub. The Bronx House on Pelham Parkway South served as a Jewish community center for decades. There was no catastrophe here, no expressway, no wave of arson. The Jewish families simply followed post-war suburban migration. They moved to Scarsdale, to White Plains, to New Rochelle. The journey was short. Pelham Parkway sits just minutes from the Westchester border, but the effect was the same as if they had moved to another country. Today, Pelham Parkway is predominantly Albanian, South Asian, and Hispanic. A handful of elderly Jewish residents remain in rent-stabilized apartments along Pelham Parkway South. They are the last witnesses to what this neighborhood once was. When they are gone, the living memory will go with them. A neighborhood where the last Jewish residents are elderly tenants in rent-stabilized flats is a slow disappearance still in progress. But cross back to Brooklyn and you will find a neighborhood where the Jewish chapter faded more gently and left behind just enough traces to haunt the streets without explaining them. Number 6. Flatbush stretches across central Brooklyn, not to be confused with East Flatbush at number 10. For the British viewer, think of it as the difference between Whitechapel and Stepney. Adjacent, related, but with distinct identities. In the 1940s and 50s, Flatbush was a solidly middle-class Jewish neighborhood. Kings Highway and Avenue J were the commercial spines. On a Friday afternoon, the bakeries on Avenue J pushed out fresh challahs as fast as the ovens allowed. Kosher butchers wrapped brisket in brown paper. The Jewish population peaked in the early 1960s at an estimated 60%. Synagogues included the Flatbush Jewish Center on East 9th Street and the East Midwood Jewish Center on Ocean Avenue. Today, Flatbush is one of the most ethnically diverse neighborhoods in the United States. The Jewish population has fallen to roughly 5%. Walk down Kings Highway and you will pass a halal butcher, a jerk chicken shop, and a Bangladeshi grocery. 50 years ago, every one of those shop fronts sold kosher food. If you look closely at older residential buildings, you will occasionally see the faint rectangular outline on a doorframe where a mezuzah was once mounted, a small shadow on the wood. The only physical evidence that the people who built these homes carried a different faith through these doors. A neighborhood where the only trace of Jewish life is a mezuzah scar on a doorframe has a particular kind of melancholy. But head north to the Bronx one more time and you will find a boulevard where the architecture itself remembers what the people have forgotten. Number 5. The Grand Concourse runs 4.5 miles through the western Bronx. It was designed in 1892 by Louis Reese, who modeled it on the Champs-Élysées. Wide lanes, landscaped medians, elegant apartment buildings on either side, and for decades, the families who filled those buildings were Jewish. In the 1930s and 40s, the Grand Concourse became the address for upwardly mobile Jewish families leaving the Lower East Side and Harlem. The Art Deco apartment buildings are architectural jewels. The Fish Building at 1150 Grand Concourse, the Andrew Friedman Home at 1125. These buildings had terrazzo lobbies, ornamental ironwork, and doormen in uniform. At its peak in the early 1950s, an estimated 65% of the corridor was Jewish. The Concourse Center of Israel on 183rd Street and Temple Adath Israel filled their pews on Shabbat. The decline was brutal. Through the 1960s and 70s, the Bronx experienced building abandonment, landlord arson, and civic neglect. Jewish families fled. By 1980, the Grand Concourse was lined with boarded-up windows and burnt-out shells. President Jimmy Carter visited Charlotte Street in 1977 and said it looked like a bombed-out city in Europe. Today, several Art Deco buildings have been restored, but the Jewish community that built this boulevard is gone. Step into the lobby of one of those buildings and look at the brass mailboxes. The names now read Rodriguez, Diallo, Mensah, and Chen. 50 years ago, they read Goldstein, Levine, Shapiro, and Katz. The terrazzo floors are the same. Everything else has changed. A boulevard modeled on the Champs-Élysées and filled for decades by Jewish families is a story of ambition and loss in equal measure. But travel back to Brooklyn and you will find a neighborhood whose Jewish past has been buried under a layer of gentrification so thick that even the buildings have been made unrecognizable. Number 4. The south side of Williamsburg sits between the Brooklyn waterfront and the Brooklyn-Queens Expressway. Today it is synonymous with luxury condominiums and rooftop bars, but most people who have moved here in the last 20 years have no idea what was here before they arrived. In the 1920s through the 1960s, South Williamsburg was home to a large non-Hasidic Jewish community. This is distinct from the Satmar Hasidic community on the north side, which still thrives. South Williamsburg had Reform and conservative synagogues, Yiddish language social clubs, and Jewish-owned garment workshops along Broadway and Marcy Avenue. The non-Hasidic Jewish departure began in the 1960s. The neighborhood became largely Latino through the 80s and 90s. Then came the gentrification wave. Median home sale prices in South Williamsburg now exceed $1 million for a two-bedroom apartment. The former synagogues have been converted. Some are luxury loft apartments, others are galleries or co-working offices. A resident who moved here in 2020 would have no reason to suspect that the building where they practice yoga on Tuesday evenings was once a place where a congregation gathered every Friday to welcome the Sabbath. A neighborhood where former synagogues now house yoga studios is the kind of irony that writes itself. But the next entry carries a much deeper surprise, because this neighborhood was one of the largest Jewish settlements in all of New York, and almost no one alive today knows it. Number 3, Harlem. The word evokes a single, powerful association: Black American culture. The Harlem Renaissance, Langston Hughes and Duke Ellington, and the Apollo Theater, and all of that is real and extraordinary. But before it was the capital of Black America, Harlem was one of the largest Jewish neighborhoods in New York City. In the early 1900s, Jewish families from the Lower East Side moved north to Harlem in enormous numbers. By 1917, according to the Jewish Communal Register, an estimated 175,000 Jews lived in Harlem. The neighborhood had over 100 synagogues. Temple Israel of Harlem, founded in 1873, was one of the most prominent Reform synagogues in the city. The Institutional Synagogue on 116th Street offered worship, social services, athletics, and education for thousands. Ohab Zedek operated on 116th Street before later moving to the Upper West Side. The transition began in the 1920s as Black families moved north during the Great Migration. By the mid-1930s, the Jewish population had shrunk to a fraction. By 1950, it was functionally gone. Temple Israel moved downtown. Ohab Zedek relocated to West 95th Street. The buildings that once housed over 100 congregations became churches or were demolished. Today, there is no marker on 116th Street acknowledging that this block was once the center of a Jewish community of 175,000. Not a plaque, not a sign, not a stone. A neighborhood where 175,000 Jewish residents once lived and no physical trace remains is an erasure so total it barely feels possible. But the next entry is the one everyone thinks they already know, and that assumption is exactly what makes it so dangerous. Number 2, the Lower East Side of Manhattan, the neighborhood that is supposed to be the origin story of Jewish New York. Hester Street, Orchard Street, Delancey Street. This is the one neighborhood people will say they already understand. They do not. In 1910, an estimated 540,000 Jews lived below 14th Street. That figure comes from Moses Rishin, the historian who wrote The Promised City. The population density was among the highest in the world, higher than Bombay, higher than Calcutta. The Lower East Side had hundreds of synagogues, yeshivas, and Landsmanschaften. The Educational Alliance on East Broadway served tens of thousands of new arrivals. The Daily Forward operated from a building on East Broadway whose facade still carries the paper's name in Hebrew letters. Today, the Jewish population is estimated at fewer than 10,000. Many are elderly residents of cooperative housing built by Jewish unions. The amalgamated dwellings on Grand Street, The Hillman Housing Complex. These residents are often in their 80s and 90s. They are the last living tissue of a community that once numbered over 500,000. Outside those co-ops, the tenement buildings on Orchard Street are boutique hotels. The garment workshops on Allen Street are cocktail bars. Katz's Delicatessen still operates, but it is now a tourist destination. The Tenement Museum charges $27 per ticket to walk through apartments where families once lived 6 to a room. The Bialy Stoker Synagogue on Willett Street still holds services, but for every Bialy Stoker that survives, a dozen congregations have closed. Walk down Rivington Street on a Saturday night. The bars are packed. Young people line up behind velvet ropes to enter a club in a building where a garment factory once ran 3 shifts a day. Above the door, if you look carefully, you can sometimes see the ghost of older signage, letters in Yiddish, fading into the brick. The Lower East Side remembers it was Jewish. It has made a business of remembering. But there is a difference between memory and a museum. That is the kind of DIing that happens in plain sight. A neighborhood that turned its own Jewish history into a tourist attraction is a particular kind of loss. But our final destination has suffered something worse. This neighborhood was not preserved. It was not gentrified. It was burned. And when the fire stopped, every trace of the Jewish community that lived here was gone. Number 1, Mott Haven sits at the southern tip of the Bronx. Today, it is one of the fastest gentrifying neighborhoods in New York City. Glass and steel apartment towers are rising along the waterfront. A 2-bedroom apartment in one of the new developments rents for over $3,500 a month. Real estate agents have rebranded the area as the Piano District. No one mentions the Jewish community that lived here for decades. In the 1920s and 30s, Jewish families settled in Mott Haven and the surrounding South Bronx. They were working class, garment workers, taxi drivers, small shopkeepers. They built synagogues on Willis Avenue, on 138th Street, on Alexander Avenue. The Mott Haven Jewish Community Center on East 141st Street was the gathering place for a population estimated at 30 to 40,000. In the late 1960s, landlords in the South Bronx began abandoning their buildings. When a building could no longer generate enough rent, the owner would sometimes pay someone to set it on fire. The insurance payout was more valuable than the property. Between 1970 and 1980, an estimated 40% of the South Bronx housing stock was destroyed by fire. 7 census tracts lost more than 97% of their buildings. The Jewish families of Mott Haven did not leave gradually, they fled. By 1975, the Jewish population had fallen from tens of thousands to effectively zero. The synagogues were abandoned, some burned with the rest of the neighborhood. On October 5, 1977, during Game 2 of the World Series at Yankee Stadium, ABC television cameras showed aerial footage of a building burning just blocks from the ballpark. Howard Cosell is often quoted as saying, "The Bronx is burning." What is not disputed is what America saw that night: a borough on fire, a community already gone. Today, Mott Haven has been reborn as a destination for young professionals. The new apartment buildings have roof terraces and concierge services. A 1-bedroom on a block where Jewish families once watched everything they owned burn now rents for $2,800 a month. The listing describes the neighborhood as vibrant and up and coming. There is no memorial in Mott Haven for the Jewish community, no historical marker, not on Willis Avenue, not on Alexander Avenue, not anywhere. The gentrification has paved over the ashes so completely that even the memory of loss has been lost. A construction crane swings over a lot on East 141st Street. The steel frame of a new building is going up. Beneath the foundation, somewhere in the compacted earth, there may still be fragments of the Mott Haven Jewish Community Center that once stood on this ground. No one on the pavement below knows that it did.